Okay, from 7th canto. It is chapter number 14. In that chapter entitled Ideal Family Life, and verse number today is 37. So the 7th canto is very beautiful. And I was just thinking that how Narsim Chaturdashi is there tomorrow. And we had fortune for the last almost maybe like 1.5 years. We have been discussing 7th canto, and so much we discussed about Lord Narasimhadev and Prahlad Maharaja's prayers, and then further continuing. Narad Muni is also giving so many instructions in the 7th canto. So this entire 7th canto is so wonderful, so much of instruction, so much to understand and apply and make our life perfect with these wonderful teachings. In this 7th canto only, Prahlad Maharaj very nicely talks about the human form of life is so rare and the time span is so limited, and how our time just goes very fast. And one doesn't realize, and then suddenly we find that we have run out all of our time. And then again, the livingity, we get trapped in this so many species of life. So Prahlad Maharaj was very direct, In fact, he was directly even preaching to Hiranyakashipu also. Sadhumanye asarvaryadehinam sada samudvignadhiyam asatkriham hitvatpatam grihmandakupam vanam gato yadharimashayata. So he was so direct, He was very clearly telling the goal of life is to actually take shelter of Lord Hari and go back to Godhead. And you are just caught up in this griham andhakupam, he was saying like that. So Prahlad Maharaj was very clear about how ultimate destination of all the living entity is to take shelter of the Lord and go back to Godhead. And Prahlad Maharaj's compassion also is so great. Prahlad Maharaj has been saying that I don't want to go till the last fool in this material world goes back to Godhead. And he was saying that I don't want to go to some Himalaya for my own deliverance. Rather, I remain in this world and I preach the message of God. Saying I have no personal problem. I'm okay. Because I'm engaged in the loving service of the Lord. My consciousness is completely engrossed in singing the glories of the Lord, in glorifying the Lord. So I have no issue, Raghunath said. But it says, Shoche tato vimukho chetasa indriyartha. But I'm only concerned about all the fools and rascals of this world who are simply trying to enjoy. What kind of enjoyment? The Maya Sukh, the illusory enjoyment. Maya Sukhaya Bharam Udbhatu. They're carrying the heavy burden of material enjoyment. This is how Prahlad Maharaj was so enlightened by the grace of Lord Narasimhadev. And we know also when Prahlad Maharaj got the darshan of Lord Narasimhadev, then he simply prayed, Oh Lord, if you want to benedict me, then remove even the traces of the material desires in my heart, from the core of my heart, that all the material desires will burn out. Because Prahlad Maharaj was so clear about how this whole material world, which is actually the cause of material desire. Because of our material desires, we get caught up in this material world. And that's how the living entity suffers perpetually in this material existence. So Prahlad Maharaj is praying, Oh Lord, please destroy this all material desires from the core of my heart. And he simply wants to serve his spiritual master. Serve Vidya Seva is saying that I only desire to serve my spiritual master and serve you, O my Lord. So this very beautiful, that 7th canto, Prahlad Maharaj's prayers are so amazing and so purifying and instructing. And we can just simply take these teachings and we can perfect our life. We can go back to God just by following the footsteps of Prahlad Maharaj. That he is one of the Mahajan. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would love to hear about Dhruv Maharaj and Prahlad Maharaj so many times. Hundreds of times he would hear from Gadadhar Pandit, Gadadhar Das, Gadadhar Pandit. He would hear hundreds of times the pastimes of Dhruv Maharaj and Prahlad Maharaj, like that. So today's verse is telling that how the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he is actually is sitting in so many species of life, the bodies of the human beings, animals, birds, saints, and demigods. In all the species of life, the Lord is residing. So Prabhupada quote this verse, Ishvara sarvabhutana hrideshvara tishtati brahmyam sarvabhutani jantarudhani mayaya. The Supreme Lord is sitting in everyone's heart and is directing the wanderings of all living entities. So this is amazing about the Lord's affection for the living entity. So Lord is so affectionate that Lord does not leave the company of the living entity, even though the living entity has left the company of the Lord. This is amazing, no? Like the living entity wants to enjoy separately from the Lord, so he leaves the company of the Lord. That's what we understand. Krishna bhulya jeev bhogavancha kare nikatasthamaya kare dhipadiya kare. So living entity forgets the Lord and he leaves the company of the Lord. But Lord does not leave the company of devotee, the living entity. So Lord continues to be with the living entity, right next to him, so close to him. So Lord is also called Suhit. Suhidam Sarvabhutana. So he is the closest friend of all living entities, the most intimate and closest friend of all the living entities. So Lord does not leave. Lord is always there. And why God does not leave? Because Lord is always waiting, hoping when this divinity will turn towards me. And He just ready to give him all facilities, all intelligence, all guidance so that he can come back. But he remains there as a neutral friend, just witnessing the different kinds of activities. So this is very amazing about the Lord. For the Lord does not leave the living entity. He's always ready to serve the living entity by serving both ways. One way the living entity wants to enjoy independently, so Lord sanctions it, unwillingly. He does it because that's what living entity wants. So he allows him to go to so many spaces of life. But in all the spaces of life, Lord also accompanies. And and when the living entity has any desire to come back, then Lord is immediately ready to supply all wisdom to come back also. So this is in fourth canto, 28th verse 51, 28th chapter 51 verse, very nicely explains about this, how the Lord is so affectionate and always wanting to see that divinity can come back. So this is when the Vedarbi, her husband, Malyadvaja, he died. And that time when Brahmana appears in front of her. And it is mentioned that Brahmana actually was no one but Super Soul actually. He was Super Soul himself. And and this Brahmana speaks to that lady, to Vedarbi. So what he says, the appearance of an old friend in the form of Brahmana is very significant. In his Paramatma feature, Krishna is the old friend of everyone. He's the old friend of all of us. According to Vedic injunction, Krishna is sitting with the living entity side by side. According to Shruti Mantra, Dvaya Suparna Sarja Sakhaya Saman Vrikshe Parishashvajate Taroranya Pipalam Swadhyati. Then Taroranya Pipalam Swadhyati. Anastanyo Avichakashiti. And thus Suparnam, and then Saman Vrikshe Purusho Nimagno. That next verse also is there. That how in the same tree, this both the Paramatma bird and the Jiva bird is sitting. And the Lord is sitting within the heart of every unity as Suhrit, as the best friend. So Lord is mentioned as Suhrit in many places. So Vidam Sarva Bhutana, they're also mentioned, right? And in 9th chapter also, 9.17 also, Lord is called Suhrit, they're also mentioned. Sakshi, Suhrit, there also it comes. So Lord is mentioned Suhrit many places like that because he's the he's a friend of all the living, best friend of all the living entities. So Lord is always eager to have the living entity come home back to God. Sitting with the living entity as witness, the Lord gives him all chances to enjoy himself materially, but whenever there is an opportunity, the Lord gives good counsel and advises the living entity to abandon trying to become happy through material adjustment and instead turn his face toward the Supreme Personality of Godhead and surrender unto Him. When one becomes serious to follow the mission of the spiritual master, then his resolution is tantamount to seeing the Supreme Personality of Godhead face to face. So he concludes that actually by serving the instruction of spiritual master, one gets all the help, from the Lord also to attain to Him. So, because the next verse only, Prabhupada writes in the purport, he says, a sincere devotee who follows the instruction of the spiritual master certainly gets direct direction from his heart, from the Super Soul. So, in our case, Prabhupada says here that the Brahmana, why the Lord appeared in the form of Brahmana there, not directly, why he did not directly speak? Because it says that when somebody is not completely purified, then he may not be able to see Krishna face to face, like that. So that way, he came in the form of Paramatma, who was a Brahmana, who was super soul only. And then he says, a sincere devotee who follows the instruction of the spiritual master certainly gets direct instructions from his heart, from the super soul. Thus, a sincere devotee is always helped directly or indirectly by the spiritual master and the super soul. So what he's saying is, when somebody sincerely tries to follow the instruction of his spiritual master, then the super soul also gives more and more help and guidance that how one can please the spiritual master. He also helps. And that's one becomes enabled to please the Guru. I mean, to the Lord also. Yes, Prasada, Bhagavad Prasada. So actually both help. So spiritual master helps us by giving instructions so that we can please the Lord. And when we are serious about following the instructions of the spiritual master, the Lord within our heart also helps us to follow the spiritual master nicely. Because how we can follow nicely spiritual master, so we need the help of Lord also in the heart. So he helps for that. And how can we please the Supreme Lord? So spiritual master helps us. So that we can engage in a way that it is pleasing to the Supreme Lord. So they are actually like a team. The super soul within and the Lord, the Lord also. Super soul within the Lord and the super soul without is the spiritual master. So both are like in one team only. So both are actually trying to take this living entity back to God. So that's how it works very nicely. So he says that if the devotee serves his spiritual master sincerely, Krishna automatically becomes pleased. By satisfying the spiritual master, one automatically satisfies Krishna. The devotee becomes enriched by both the spiritual master and Krishna. The super soul is eternally the friend of living entity and always remains with him. The super soul has always been ready to help the living entity, even before the creation of this material world. So he is always there. The super soul has been accompanying the living entity since before the creation. So it's always there. In the spiritual world, Lord is there. And when the living entity leaves the spiritual world, comes to this material world, still Lord comes. They say the natural position of the living entity is to serve the Lord in transcendental loving attitude. But when the living entity wants to become Krishna himself or imitate Krishna, he falls down into the material world. And see, Krishna, the Supreme Father, his affection for the living entity is eternal. So Lord's affection for all the living entities is eternal. Love is eternal. When the living entity falls down into the material world, the Supreme Lord, through his expansion, Paramatma, keeps company with the living entity. In this way, the living entity may someday return home back to God. The Lord is always waiting. Someday this person will turn towards me. And it says, by misusing his independence, the living entity falls down from the service of the Lord and takes a position in the material world as enjoyer. And that is to say, the living entity takes his position within a material body. Wanting to take a very exalted position in this world, the living entity instead becomes entangled in repetition of birth and death. And then he selects as a position as a human being, a demigod, cat, dog, tree, insects, viruses, so many varieties of species he gets into. 84 lakh species are there. And the super soul, however, does not like him to do this. We get into so many species of life. The super soul is very much unhappy seeing the flight of the living entity into so many material species of life and trying to enjoy so many ways. The super soul, however, does not like him to do this. Consequently, the super soul instructs him to surrender unto the Supreme Personality of God. The Lord then takes charge of the living entity. But unless the living entity is uncontaminated by the desires, he cannot surrender to the Supreme Lord. So he has to, actually turn to the Lord and be willing to give up all kinds of material desires. As we discussed that how Prahlad Maharaj was praying, oh Lord, please destroy all this material desire from the core of my heart. Because that's how we get into so many varieties of species of life. That's the cause of perpetuity going on in so many varieties of species. So here he says this, because he says, because the conditions of the material world is full of materialistic lusty desires, he cannot understand the Supreme Personality of God. So that is the cause. So more we are with material desires and going on to fulfill those material desires, to that degree, it will be very difficult for us to take the instruction of the Lord, for our ultimate goal. The Lord may sanction, He may facilitate those material desires only. But what Lord wants to tell us, His heart, that we can't take it. Because we are simply adamant in trying to fulfill our own material desires, lusty desires. So the degree one is not ready to give up, then it becomes very difficult. And that's what he says, Raghava says to Hiranyakashipu also. Matirna Krishna Varata Sathova. Because Dinabratanam. So he has taken the Din breath that I'm going to enjoy this material world. So that's the adamant nature of the living entity, which does not allow him to take the instruction of the super soul, to take the instruction of the spiritual master, the super soul also. So he cannot understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That's why the 10th offense is there, to what is that? Not have complete faith in the system, to maintain material attachments. So they're also saying that becomes an option. So basically, a living entity has to desire to come back to Krishna and give up his material desires. Somewhere he has to turn to Krishna, like that. So that's why he's saying that the reason for foolishness is described. Herein, the reason for foolishness is described. Because the conditions in the material world is full of materialistic desires, he cannot understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Although the Lord is situated in everyone's heart, it is because of this foolishness that one cannot take instructions from the Lord. Although the Lord is ready to instruct everyone, both externally and internally. Tanami Buddhi Yogam. In other words, the Lord can give instructions on devotional service by which one can return home back to God. Unfortunately, however, people do not take this devotional service. The Lord, being situated in everyone's heart, can give one complete instructions on going back to God. But because of lusty desires, one engages himself in materialistic activities and does not render service to the Lord. Therefore, one is bereft of the value of the Lord's instruction. So this is very amazing that how he becomes bereft of this opportunity to instruction because of his continuing lusty desires. That's why the spiritual master helps. So when the living entity comes in contact with the bona fide spiritual master, then he appeals to him this, that you give up this kinds of material desires, give up this gratification plan, and take up the plan of take up the program of Krishna consciousness. That's what he appeals. Spiritual master, he comes for that purpose only. When Srila Prabhupada came here to West, so Prabhupada said, if they knew for what purpose I have come here for, they would have probably sent me back or whatever. They would have killed him or something. Because Prabhupada was completely against the entire current of the material civilization, the way they were heading into. So I was hearing Maharaj lecture, he was saying that when Prabhupada said no meditating, no gambling, no intoxication, no illicit sex. So for a Westerner, it is like don't drink water, don't sleep. For the people in Western country, it sounds like that. So he said, probably nobody will hear that. Nobody would hear. But Prabhupada was so daring that he said, because he said that I have not come here to please the Americans. He had come here to actually give the real thing, to tell them actually this whole program of some gratification will not make you happy. You rather take instruction of the Supreme Lord. Tumhare loite ami hoinu avatar. Toma bin mora bin Toma bin Ami bina bandhu kya che tomara. So that is proper said. For that purpose only I have come to this Western civilization. Bhagavad Gita is saying this. But Prabhupada also has come for that purpose only. Tumhare loite ami hoinu avatar. For your deliverance only I have come to this Western world, Western civilization. And ami bina bandhu kya che where you will get any well-wisher than me? That's why Prabhupada is right. Your ever well-wisher. He was actually the ever well-wisher of all the living entities. So he was not at all giving any kind of cheating program. He was very straightforward and told, this won't work. Entire program of some gratification will not help you. You have messed up your life. You have actually completely messed up and you are suffering. So Srila Prabhupada, that's why he gave them this entire program of Krishna consciousness, where he clearly told Since Krishna consciousness and gratification goes together. Here in purports also like that. So another important thing is, I'm not remembering very exactly, but I read this point that how when a living entity actually tries to control his senses, so that he can, he can be saved from this entire program of matter life. So as sadhaka, when we become more conscious and we consciously try to avoid, our senses getting engaged whimsically in so many wrong ways. So when we do that, then the super soul also supplies us more and more help like that. And Radheshwar was saying this in one of the lectures. He said that when we are careless, and we are determined, to go on in our natural whims of engaging. Natural means not natural, but the way we just pulled in so many ways, and we are not trying to check our senses. We just allow them, like that. We don't take that discipline of the spiritual master. Then he says the super soul actually more and more than gives up on him. He'll get forgetfulness. Actually, he says. So that means that's why Prabhupada said many times that one has to rigidly try to follow this regulative principles and devotion service. So that is the part of jiva, because many times they say that you practice Krishna consciousness, automatically everything will happen. So that is true only. That's correct. But the part of Krishna consciousness program is this also, that we the disciple has to sincerely follow the regulative principles given by the scriptures and the spiritual master. It's important. So when we rigidly try to practice by those related principles and all that, the Lord also helps more and more because he sees that he's taking responsibility. He's taking responsibility. The Lord also helps. So Lord gives more and more, intelligence and wisdom and guidance so that the divinity can make more and more advancement. But when we become careless, when we become neglectful, for Bharat Maharaj, willful, he said he did willful neglect of his sadhana. So when we become neglectful, careless, then we get actually apohanam also. We get more and more forgetfulness. And very difficult then for us to make progress than that. So that's why he says, Aldar Maharaj says, he says, pure desire, sure success. Okay, that is another point. But the point is more we, and Prabhupada said this, success is sure for rigid practitioners. Success is for sure for rigid practitioners. So that means more we adhere to the instruction of the spiritual master and try to practice deity. Sometimes somebody will say, hey, this is Jnani's path, We are not here, the people who are just trying to control our senses and trying to be rigid or things like that. Jnanis are very rigid, But no, for devotees also, we are not rigid in that sense. We are rigid to go back to God. We are rigid not to give to mind. We are rigid not to forget Krishna. So that rigidity is good. That is not bad. So in fact, that's the cost the devotee has to pay. It's called intense greed to get Krishna. So that kind of rigidity is not something like Jnani, because Krishna is the center. We want to attain Krishna. We want to awaken our love for Krishna. We don't want to give ourselves to mind. That kind of rigidity is nice. Rigidity is nice. So the Jnanis, they are rigid not for Krishna. They are rigid for their own, becoming powerful or pure or eventually God only, like that. So they may do strict austerity and be very rigid in many aspects. So, but devotee is rigid not to give to Maya and be with Krishna, but he's flexible in terms of his service to Guru and his service to Krishna. So at the same time, he's very, very malleable. The way the Guru wants him to serve, he's very happy to serve. So he's rigid to serve Guru, but malleable when the instructions are there. And he is ready to accommodate the way the Lord wants him, the Guru wants him to serve. He is completely malleable in that way. So where is rigidity? Rigidity is in following the spiritual master, pleasing the spiritual master, pleasing the Lord, like that. So this is how he says that the more we are actually, take responsibility of engaging our senses nicely, the more super soul also helps us. He gives us more and more help. So Tumi Rishi Kesha Rishi Kadanya, that is true. By the help of the Lord only we can control our senses. That is completely true. At the same time, we have to put our endeavor as well. That's what he says, Daya Sarvabhuteshu Santushta Yenekeva Sarvendriya Upashantya Tushyatya Janatana. So he says that, Daya Sarvabhuteshu, that means being compassionate to all divinities, santushta yene kena, being satisfied in whatever situation. And then he says, sarvendriya upashantacha. And when tries to bring or keeps his senses under control, when he endeavoring to control his senses also, sarvendriya upashantacha, tushyati ashuddhanada, then you can please the Supreme Lord, like that. So that means we are doing that only to please the Lord, like that. So devotee has to also endeavor to control his mind and senses in order to engage in Krishna's service, in order to preserve that energy to serve the Lord, mental energy and sensual energy to serve the Lord. So that is, and super soul will help us. By the grace of the Lord only we can do that. But we have to take the responsibility to do that. And then Lord will supply so much of intelligence and guidance by which we can actually be able to do it like that. But in the name of we are in bhakti yoga only, everything happens automatic. So that can be a little dangerous because that creeps some kind of casual approach creeps in them, like that. So by the mercy of the Lord, it will happen. But at the same time, we also take the responsibility as well. So that way we can make nice advancement in Krishna consciousness. So there's a very nice purport 5.8.3 that Prabhupada writes very nicely. He says the Supreme Lord does not want any living entity to act sinfully. And he begs him through his good conscience to refrain from sin. Because somebody may say that even the sinful activities, God is there in the heart, He's sanctioning. He's only directing everyone. Because in this verse it is said, the Supreme Lord is situated in everyone's heart, who Arjuna, and is directing the wanderings of all living entities. Okay, so He's only directing the wanderings of all living entities. Somebody doing sinful activity, Lord is only directing. Somebody may put Lord responsible for that. So Prabhupada is clarifying. He's saying, Supreme Lord does not want any living being to act sinfully. And he begs him, begging. So he's in the heart as Paramatma is begging every living entity through his good conscience to refrain from sin. But when someone insists upon acting sinfully, the Jiva, divinity has that responsibility. But if he insists upon acting sinfully, the Supreme Lord gives him the sanction to act at his own risk. Okay, you will act at your own risk. No one can do anything without the sanction of the Lord, but he's so kind that when the conditions will persist in doing something, the Lord permits the individual soul to act at his own risk. So that's why we only insist. So that's why we also have to not take the responsibility that actually not like Lord is the sanctioner. So whatever is happening in my life, it's all what Lord is making it happen. We have responsibility. We also responsible for that. In fact, our existence in this material world and our going on in so many material species of life and indulging in so many kinds of material activities, we are responsible. Lord is sanctioning because we are adamant. But Lord is waiting and ready to help us in all possible ways if we become little inclined to come back. Right. So that's why the sincere intent of the living entity is very, very important. So I was thinking that how this knowledge of Lord is in our heart is so nice. If you can reflect on it, if you become more aware of this point. Of course, devotee has much more understanding how Krishna is watching me all the time. Krishna is always with me. But having this understanding that Lord is there in our heart, right next to our heart. So that can make us actually more responsible in all aspects of our life. Like we will feel responsible to more and more be chaste to Krishna through our actions, in our words, in our thoughts. We would like to see that how we don't displease the Lord, like that. So more we become aware of this fact, like that. Because the more we are conscious of that, then our activities can be more and more aligned the way to be pleasing to the Lord. Because what happens when we act whimsically, as soon as we forget, we forget. Like if suppose there is in company also, when the boss is present, then everybody is so conscious. Nobody will watch video games, nobody will chit chat. When boss is there, so everybody can be very aligned with the work of the company. Everybody will show like I am, the best employee. Right? But when the boss is out, then you can see so many varieties of things will happen. Somebody will be playing chess, somebody will be just watching some video games. So many things will happen. But here the Supreme Lord, actually, He is always there in our heart. So if we become more and more aware of this fact, then we can feel that responsibility. that healthy pressure that yes, Lord is always there watching me, and that can actually help us, to be more and more, good in our behavior. Whether we are in present in devotees' presence, I mean, externally we are there in front of Lord as deities, or with devotees, or otherwise also. We can always have that, endeavor to align all our words, thoughts, deeds in a way that we engage in a way that it is pleasing to the Supreme Lord. So this is one reflection I was thinking that, because Lord is present in our heart, so we can, we can feel responsible like that. And also, the intent of a devotee is very important, because Lord understands our intent because it's just right in our heart. So that's why sincerely expressing our desire and, offering our, intent, conveying our intent to the Lord is also very important. Like, one devotee is asking that, Maharaj, we are chanting, you are asking to Bhakti Yadavana Samara. You're saying that, Maharaj, we are chanting, we are doing so many offenses. No? So how that Namaprad, because this is all Namaprad going on, right? How then devotee can come from Namaprad to Namabhas eventually? How it will happen? Because we are committing offense. So offense means we are displeasing. Then he's saying, no, but the Lord is a person. So he understands our intent. So when we are trying to actually avoid offenses, so the intent of avoiding offenses becomes actually the further step to eventually go towards Namabhas, like that. So the Lord understands our intent. Yes, we are struggling, we will be committing offense, we are in it, we may be in it many times, mind may be wandering, many things will be happening. But how much we are endeavoring, to be attentive, how much how much we are having that intent to actually purify our heart, and awaken our love for Krishna. So Lord sees that intent. If we have that sincere intent, so that becomes a very important, factor by which we progress from Namapra to Namabhas. Like that. So that's why the sincere intent from the side of our devotee also is required. And as we have that intent, as we become more purified, then our intentions will become more and more purified also. Like that. We will be able to have more and more good intentions and nice intentions to please the Lord and serve the Lord. So, and the whole thing becomes very much when we have the association of such sincere devotees. Because that's what Bhaktivinoda Thakur also is praying, no? Bhakti Mukti Spriha Vihina Devata, the Vaitya Thakur Sangarata. So, more we have association of such sincere devotees who are having very high intent, and they are actually following the Lord and the spiritual master very nicely. So that association is very conducive. Then we also actually, we get influenced very positively, right? So we should also try to associate with devotees by seeing how nicely they are following this spiritual master. Sometimes we just appreciate devotee, we don't know what to appreciate. Oh, this devotee is very good because he helps me a lot. This devotee is very nice because he's a good friend of mine. He talks to me very, very nicely. There are good things, but we should also be able to see the devotee's, sincerity and how he's nicely having, intent of pleasing the spiritual master, how he's assisting the spiritual master very nicely. So in the light of spiritual master's instruction and in the light of how he's trying to go back to Godhead, by sincerely executing his devotional service, we should be able to appreciate devotees like that. So when we associate with devotees, seeing their very sincere intent, seeing their very great sincerity in engaging in service of spiritual master, so those devotees association is very, very, powerful thing by which we can also pick our intentions like that, and that can actually very possibly influence, and we will also be able to have such kind of intent. That way. That's why hearing from them, associating with them, and asking questions to them can actually make us also purify our own intentions. That the association of devotees makes a very crucial role. Yeah. So thank you all very much. We'll pause here only. Grantha Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. God Pranam. Anything you want to say? You can do.